Hello, fellow stampers. This is Yana Smakula for My Favorite Things. Welcome back for another video tutorial. In this video, I have 3 card ideas to share, from quick and simple to a little bit more layered and fancy, using the Love You Big Time stamp set. Let's jump right in. The Love You Big Time stamp set is a fun one because it gives you the outline stamp to stamp the Love You, as well as the solid stamp to stamp the exact same Love You, and thus providing you with options. You can use just the outline and color the outline letters, or stamp the outline onto patterned paper, for example, and cut the letters out to have some fun pattern to them. You can stamp just the solid layer in any color of ink you like. You can use variety of inks to have an ombre look or a rainbow look, for example. Or you can combine both the solid and the outline for yet another look. You can stamp the outline directly over the solid, matching it, or you can have the outline offset slightly for a more modern look. And this is what I love to do the most. I started by stamping the solid words in pink and yellow, creating a vertical ombre look. Here, I'm using my Mini Misty stamping tool. I have a panel of white cardstock. This is cut to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and this is the size of all of the panels that will make the fronts of all of my cards today. So just 1/2 inch smaller than an A2 card. And I'm using a combination of yellow and pink inks. These are pigment inks. And I'm inking up the love word with pink ink and the U with yellow, and I'm also overlapping both inks slightly to have a little bit of orange form in the middle. I'm going to double stamp this image just to make sure that I have a very nice coverage, and also to make sure that I have that nice ombre going on in the center. It's nice to use the Misty tool for this because that allows you to stamp your images repeatedly in the same spot and not worry about your stamping being imperfect. Having stamped the solid layer, I'm going to add the outline. Now, I'm not matching the outline exactly to the solid layer. My goal is to offset it. So I'm placing the stamp over my image, and then I'm pushing it slightly to the left into the top, so that the solid layer is offset slightly to the right and to the bottom. And I'm going to stamp that in black ink. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black and just adding that black outline. And you can see how instantly this changes the look of these words. I love this. It looks very modern and very trendy. Now, this first card is going to be very simple, very bold, and very graphic. My idea is to create a colorful background, and for this, I've already cut a bunch of strips of colored cardstock. I used some scraps from my stash. And I also cut several strips from gold mirror cardstock as I wanted to add some gold accents to the background. While cutting this, I also sustained a little injury. You can see I've added some Band-Aid to one of my fingers as I had a paper cut. It's been ages since I've cut my fingers using paper. Since I've had a paper cut, and oh my, it does not feel nice to have one. So be careful when you cut the paper. I've added double-sided sticky tape to the front of my card. This is an A2 card base, so it measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And now I am just adhering the strips, the cut strips, on an angle, creating a background. I have already previously laid out the strips in an order, which I like, and now I'm just basically adding them to the background in that order, sticking them down, and creating the background for this card. This is one of the coolest ways to make a background, a colorful background, quickly and easily, and it also allows you to utilize cardstock scraps that you might have in your stash, and I'm sure we all have loads of colored cardstock scraps. In our stash, I have a bunch of little leftover cardstock pieces. So once I have that adhered, I'm going to bring my paper trimmer and just trim all the sides and all of the leftover pieces until I have a really nice and pretty background. And like I said, this will make the front of my card, but then I will have the panel, the stamped panel, go on top of that. Now, before I assemble the card, I also need to add a sentiment. And for this card, I'm just stamping one onto black cardstock and I'm going to heat emboss it in white. And the sentiment that I have is "You get me, thank you." And this sentiment also comes from the Love You Big Time stamp set. And I really love that there are additional sentiments included in this set that you can combine with the main big love you. I treated my black cardstock with anti-static powder tool. I inked the stamp with clear embossing ink. I stamped it. I added my white detail embossing powder, and then I heat set it with my heat tool to melt it. Now, before I cut this sentiment out, I'm also using my pencil eraser to remove that anti-static powder from the cardstock because it gives that milky white finish that I don't really like. And now that we have all of our elements ready, we can assemble the card. I'm going to add double-sided foam tape to the back of my stamped panel as I want to pop it up on the card. And I'm just going to go ahead and foam mount that in the center of my colorful background. And I love how the diagonal stripes frame the stamping and they help this card pop. They add a lot of color to an otherwise pretty simple card. With that in place, I'm also going to foam mount my sentiment, and I'm just placing that at the bottom, overlapping the U. And finally, I'm going to add a couple of clear droplets to this card, and that's pretty much it. It's a very simple card design, easy to make, and one that kind of pops because you have a lot of that color going on in the background, and also you have the ombre stamping on the Love You. Love it. For my second card, I stamped each letter in a different color of ink using a combination of peach, yellow, and pink for a colorful look. Once again, I'm using my MFT tool, and this allows me to easily stamp each letter in a different color. I'm not moving the stamp, I already have it on the door of my MFT, and I'm just closing the door once I've inked up the stamp and stamping it onto the background, forming a very colorful sentiment. Now, I'm using darker colors for the top row, so the word love will be stamped in darker peach, darker yellow, and darker pink, and the word you will be stamped in a lighter version of the same colors. I'm using masking tape. This is just some low-tack tape from my stash to mask the letters as I ink them up with my ink pad. This allows me to make sure I ink up just that one particular letter and that I don't add the ink onto other sections of the stamp. Now, the key here is to remember to remove the tape once you've inked the letter up. I've done that many times. I would go ahead and I ink the stamp, but then I forget to remove the tape and I end up making a mess on my background. So make sure you remove the tape before you go ahead and close the door of your MFT. And you can use whatever colors you like, whatever color combination makes you happy. I really like these colors. They kind of make me happy these days. So that's the reasoning behind the colors that I picked for this card. I had to speed up this portion of the video as this particular stamping does take quite a bit of time as you are stamping every single letter individually. And I did double and even triple stamp some of the images in some cases because I wanted to have more ink on the background. Now, having stamped the solid layer, I'm now adding the outline, and I'm doing this in exactly the same way as I did for my first card. So I'm positioning the stamp and then I'm moving it slightly to the left and to the top, offsetting it a bit on the background, and then stamping that in black ink to have that nice black offset outline. And I love the way this looks. Very modern and very trendy. I went ahead and I foam mounted this panel onto an A2 card base. I added a panel of light gray cardstock to the back to make the background for this card. I'm now adding a sentiment, and this particular sentiment reads, "I just really love you." And again, it comes from that same Love You Big Time stamp set. And I'm also adding the clear droplets onto this card. Now, I wanted to add flowers to this project, so I pulled images from the Winter Songbird stamp set. I love the florals in this set. They look very organic. By the way, I shared another video with this stamp set recently. It was a Christmas one. Do check it out if you haven't already. So I went ahead and I stamped several images from this stamp set in Memento Tuxedo Black ink onto Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And now I'm using my go-to Copic markers to do some quick coloring. I'm using the YG03 to color the leaves. I'll also use the YG01 and the YG17 to add a little bit of darker green to the larger leaves. Not being very careful or precise, I'm just doing some quick and basic coloring to add color to those. I'm also using pink, the RV34 to color the berries, and then the RV11 to color that acorn pink. I mean, of course, it's an acorn. Acorns aren't really pink, but that is what's going to work for my card. The pink is going to work for my card, so that's why I'm using pink color for this image. I used coordinating dies and I cut these images out. I have just a handful here. And now I'm using foam adhesive to add behind the images. I'm not removing the release paper just yet, as right now I just want to place the images onto the background and plan their placement. I don't yet want to stick them down. And having foam adhesive behind the images, it helps me visualize. If they lay flat on the background, they look differently. I don't know. So I always add foam adhesive even when I'm just planning the image placement. So my idea here was to use these florals to adorn the letters and have the florals somewhat follow the curve in the letters or the shape or the structure of the letters if that was possible. Once I was happy with the placement, I removed the release tape and I adhered the images in place, forming that floral cluster around the love you. And I love the way this looks. Very simple, but with a little addition of flowers. Now, the more I play with my supplies, the more ideas I have. After I finished the second card, I wanted to use the florals to create a floral background surrounding the stamped love you. So I stamped additional images from the Winter Songbird stamp set. I colored them using the same colors of markers. Now I did use a bit of yellow, Y15 and Y13 markers to color some of the flowers yellow. And I already added the foam adhesive to the back of the images, and I created a floral frame around the main stamping. Now the image here was stamped using the same technique that I used for the second card and also using the same colors. So I have the same love you, and now I just have more florals, and then some of the florals are also colored using yellow. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to position all of these florals around the love you to create that floral frame or floral background. Once I'm happy with the placement, I'm just going to remove the release paper and stick all of these pieces down to create that background. Having added all of the images, I used my scissors and I trimmed the excess pieces off. Now I did reuse some of the larger pieces, like some of the leaves. They looked good enough to fill some of the larger gaps that I had on the background. So I reused those to make this background look a little bit fuller. Next, I went ahead and heat embossed a sentiment. This one reads, "You have my whole heart for my whole life." And I heat embossed it twice. Now, the reason I did that is because I wanted to have this adhered onto the card as two separate pieces. I didn't want this as a one big chunk, as a one big sentiment, because I knew it would cover up too much of the stamping in the background. So I thought it would be a better idea to heat emboss it twice, cut the top line into a skinny strip, and then cut the bottom line into a skinny strip as well. And then foam mount both of these strips onto the card, but have space in between the strips. Once again, I added foam adhesive, this is foam adhesive tape, to the back of my stamped panel. And I foam mounted that onto a card base. And once again, I have that light gray cardstock there. And now I'm just going to foam mount the sentiments onto the card. And for this, I'm using the strip foam adhesive. I love those foam adhesive strips. They make it so easy to adhere skinny sentiment strips onto the card. I played around with the placement a little bit. I wasn't sure if I wanted the top part of the sentiment over the word love and then the bottom part of the sentiment over the word you, but I ended up placing both parts of the sentiment overlapping the you. Now, because I have that gap in between that sentiment, because it's a two-part sentiment, I think it makes it easier to read the bottom word, the you. It doesn't obscure it too much. With that done, I then once again used my clear droplets and I placed them anywhere on the background where I had the larger gaps just to fill those gaps in. And then I used my jewel picker tool and then a zig glue pen to adhere those down onto the card. So here's a look at the 3 cards I have for you today, created with a Love You Big Time stamp set from My Favorite Things. I hope you enjoyed this video and picked up a few tips and tricks along the way. Subscribe now and hit that bell icon not to miss any new card making tutorials. Thanks for watching, love you guys, and I'll see you next time.